The Amazon makes you humble very quickly because everything is so big and it feels so small. But at the same time, the magnitude of the destruction was quite painful, emotionally, but also professionally.
The Amazon, surely the most famous rainforest in the world.
It's got the world's biggest river, all those trees and animals, but also a lot of things you wouldn't expect. Oil and rubber,
Coffee and crime?
gold and diamonds.
It's a vital place for many reasons.
But scientists have been warning us it's in danger of disappearing, with major impacts on climate change wherever you are in the world.
So this week on The Climate Question from the BBC World Service, we're asking, why do we need the Amazon? I'm Jordan Dunbar.
And I'm Greer Jackson.
With us is Dr. Erica Berenguer, Senior Research Associate at the University of Oxford, but most importantly, a rainforest expert and from Brazil.
Yes, highly excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you.
Indeed we are. And you've spent a lot of time in the Amazon, and you must have met some weird and wonderful creatures in your time there. What's your favourite?
I don't have a favorite one. I have a conjunction of them, like a group of them.
Okay.
So have
Can
you
tell
heard
you're a
of army
scientist.
ants?
Army ants.
So those ants, they hunt in this line and they keep going towards everything on the forest floor. They just eat everything. And when they are coming, you see all these frogs jumping out of the line and insects flying up. Everything just runs away from them because it's an army coming towards you. And as these little insects fly out to avoid being eaten, there's birds that follow these ants to eat those insects. But not only, there's butterflies that follow the birds to feed on their poop. So those are my favorite.
A factory process, scary ants feeding different animals.
Exactly. I'm not a big fan of the ants though, because when I'm working, they do climb on you and bite you so much, and it's really painful. But I do appreciate the whole process, and you have enough time to run away from them because you can hear the bird calls. These very specific
Like a
birds that
warning.
follow. So this is really cool, right? So these birds, they are not from a single species. They are from various species, and they have a call saying the army ants are around, and all these other species group, and they move as this mixed flock together just to follow the ants. And as soon as the ants are gone, they disband and go do their own things because they are different species. So it's really cool that you can hear the call of the ants are here, and that's when you know that you have to get the hell out of the way.
I feel like my fact is a bit disappointing when I was
After that.
looking. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've really outdone, not done nearly as much research. But then again, I haven't been to the Amazon. So I've spent a lot of time in the Bornean rainforest, but not in the Amazonian rainforest. But I was looking at scarlet macaws because I think they're such beautiful birds with those beautiful feathers. But I didn't realise, do you know how long they can live for? I mean, you might not know. 50 years. And they mate for life.
Oh, see, that's what I meant by
soppy.
cute. That's nice.
What's yours, Jordan?
I have two because I wanted a range of emotions. One, I absolutely love the capybara. I think it's the biggest rodent on Earth,
Yeah.
right? It's like a giant guinea pig.
Yeah.
It looks friendly and cute. And then on the other side, the insect that now haunts my dreams, the Brazilian wandering spider. It has no web. It hunts at night. So normally if you have webs, there's a spider there, he does his thing, she does her thing, I stay out of the way. Can't do that with the wandering spider. It's the most aggressive
Sort of like
spider.
jump on you.
Yeah, it can jump up to 1 meter and it's the most venomous spider in the world.
I mean, on that note, the biodiversity, as we describe it, is the range of different plants and animals. It's the biggest in the world in the Amazon, isn't it? It's got
Yes.
more plants and animals and species than anywhere else. Tell us about why that's so important.
Biodiversity is important for many, many reasons. One of them is its utilitarian value. For example, making drugs out of it. Several venom from snakes are used on antidepressants, for example. So you have a direct impact on the pharmaceutical industry. There's the aesthetic value. Like, for example, people go to the Amazon for tourism to see scarlet macaws that makes them happy. Or there's also the intrinsic value of biodiversity, which is different species have the right to exist just because they exist. They don't need to be useful per se.
Why is the Amazon so biodiverse? Is it just because it's so big?
It's very big, and it's been evolving through a very, very long period of time. It was initially connected to the ocean and then become a swamp, and then it became the forest. But the rivers can also act as barriers for the dispersal of species. So you can have in one side of the river, because the rivers are really big, right? They're very, very big. That's why they act as a barrier. So one side, in one margin, you can have one species, and you can have a similar species on the other margin, because historically, those species are not able to cross the river. So it's extremely, extremely diverse.
What was the moment that you realized, this was going to be your sort of calling in life, in your work life?
My parents used to give me this book from Jacques Cousteau, the French explorer, which was him in the Amazon in the 70s. And there's all these animals and all these landscapes that are so beautiful. And they're part of my country. They're part of who I am, or who I thought I should be as a child. But I didn't know because I'm from Rio. And from Rio to the Amazon is 4 hours away on a plane. So it's not necessarily trivial to visit. And since that age, I always wanted to go and understand and discover, because it's this place that it seems like out of a fairy tale. Even the army ants and the Brazilian wanderer spider, but they are in the real world and they are part of my country and of who I am. And then I always wanted to be there and work there and become a specialist on it.
Do you remember your first visit? What was
Yes,
that
I do.
like?
My first visit was in the south of the Amazon, in the state of Mato Grosso, which is a highly, highly deforested state, specifically for soybeans. And the Amazon makes you humble very quickly because everything is so big and it feels so small. But at the same time, the magnitude of the destruction was quite painful emotionally, but also professionally, because you have these two sides. You know how much carbon is being emitted in a hectare of forest that is lost, but you also have the emotional attachment to the hectare of forest because you know all the amazing species that should be there. So it was both painful, humble, but also magnificent. That's why I keep coming back.
Well, you mentioned CO2, carbon dioxide, this key planet warming gas. Just help listeners understand, what is the link between a place like the Amazon and climate change?
There's different estimates that if we were to completely deforest the whole of the Amazon, the 7 million square kilometers of the Amazon that encompasses 9 countries, 60% of which is in Brazil, would be equivalent to 10 years of CO2 emissions from the whole world. That's how much carbon is stored. And that's because trees store a lot of carbon. And the bigger the tree, the more carbon it stores, especially on its trunk. But when you deforest, and the way deforestation happens is that you have a bulldozer bringing the forest down, and then the corpses of the forest lay on the ground for several weeks on end in the dry season, so they become dry enough that you can light a fire, and then that forest literally turns to ashes and smoke. And a single big tree can have 3 to 5 tons of carbon.
The other thing I find really striking is it's not just that it's contributing to climate change, but it's also been a huge buffer against climate change because it's absorbing all those climate warming gases. I've just written down a stat here. A third of carbon dioxide emitted between 2010 and 2019 was removed by rainforests, and it's been critical in slowing the impact of climate change.
Is a massive carbon sink. That's how we call it. And that's because trees do photosynthesis, right? So they use water, sunlight, and CO2 from the atmosphere to build sugars and then be able to grow. And that's why they are sequestering all that CO2 from the atmosphere. So forests are huge in mitigating climate change. We would be much worse right now if forests didn't exist, if they were not carbon sinks, as you just so well put.
And it's not just carbon, though. For Brazil and much of the region, they also help with weather.
Yes, excellent point. Forests are great climate regulators, and especially when we think about rainfall generation. And that's because, you know, when you see a documentary, you see that fog in the morning over the forest, and that's all the water that the forest is pumping out through the leaves. That's why we have that beautiful morning fog. So lots of studies have shown that in a radius of 100 kilometers around a forest, rainfall levels are higher than in a 100K buffer around a deforested area. So the forest generates its own rainfall, helping to keep it really wet and therefore as a rainforest.
Because I've read it also then can influence things like ocean currents around the world. So actually deforesting the Amazon is a much bigger impact than just the 100 kilometers, as you say. It's a global impact.
If you think about the whole of the American continents, we have rainfall being generated by the Amazon falling in Texas.
Wow, that far away.
That far away. So the agribusiness of Texas
So those farmers in Texas.
Exactly. It's highly dependent on Amazonian conservation. And if you go down to the La Plata Basin, so that's Uruguay and Argentina, 40% of the water of the La Plata Basin comes from rainfall generated from the Amazon. And talking about Brazil, our main source of electricity is hydrodams. And those hydrodams, they are...
they need the rain for the water.
They need the rainfall to be able to exist. So basically, you're talking about one of the largest economies of the world, which is Brazil, depends on the existence of the Amazon, because without the Amazon, there's no rain. Without rain, there's no energy for our industry.
Because the heat's also driving droughts in the Amazon as well, and that's often linked to fires, which is really what your work is about. And we have seen a lot of fires in the Amazon recently, haven't we?
Definitely. And I think we have normalized fires in the Amazon, but if you just close your eyes for a second, you can see that it's quite paradoxical. You have one of the wettest places in the world, which is the rainforest, catching on fire. So how are those things connected? We have normalized something that doesn't quite make sense. And the reason for that, it's because the Amazon has become drier and drier and drier due to climate change. Some studies show that from the 70s till now, if we look at the whole basin, temperature has already increased by 1.5 degrees. If we look at the maximum temperature, there's some regions that have increased 3 degrees since the 70s. So temperature...
Since the 70s, so not even pre-industrial times,
no,
which is what we usually anchor temperature changes to. 70s,
since the 70s, because it's when we have records for the region. But that's the 3 degrees that I'm saying. It's not average temperature. It's just maximum temperature. Still, what this does is similar to putting your clothes to dry out in a sunny summer day. The clothes gets really dry really quick because the atmosphere is dry, is pulling all that water out of your clothes. It's the same, but with the vegetation, with the forest. If it's hotter, you have more water being drawn out of the vegetation, and especially of what we call the leaf litter. So those are the twigs and leaves on the forest floor, which is basically fuel.
It's like the tinder that starts the fire.
Exactly. So before, fire has been used for centuries in the Amazon, especially by traditional populations, in subsistence farming, in manioc farming. But fires, they would be used on their plot of land, and once they hit the forest, the leaf litter would be so wet that it wasn't able to propagate. Now, because of climate change, fire is able to consume the litter because it's dry enough and to propagate within the forest.
So there's no barrier, it's spreading out of control.
It's spreading out of control. And it's a forest that did not co-evolve with fire, because many ecosystems have evolved with fires, like, for example, forests in California, Mediterranean forests. They have mechanisms to protect themselves as an ecosystem from fires because of natural pressure. not the Amazon, because
Because it
fires.
used to be so wet.
Exactly. So it's a recent problem, a growing problem, and something that unfortunately, what all the projections show, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, okay, so climate change is making things worse, but you're suggesting that it's humans that are causing the fires, or is there also a natural... No.
So all fires in the Amazon need to be started by humans. The ignition source needs to be man-made. There's no natural fires like other regions that you have lightning
Yeah.
causing the fires. But in the Amazon, we don't have dry lightning. Lightning is accompanied by rain.
Okay.
And that is enough to make the field wet enough that the fire is not going to propagate if it's due to lightning. But if it's the middle of dry season and a fire is being used in an area adjacent to the forest, for example, in the deforestation process that I explained before, if that fire escapes within the forest and it's the dry season, before the fire will die. But now the fire is able to propagate within the forest.
And that's how you lost your favourite tree, isn't it? In a fire.
Yes, we have several plots that we go back regularly. We call that permanent study plots. And in those areas, we know the trees quite well. They're all tagged. They have their name tag. So you go back to your spreadsheet and you know how much that tree is growing every year. If the canopy has suffered some damage.
Do you give them names like, I don't know, like human names, or are they just by their species?
We call them via Latin name, yeah.
Oh, how boring.
Very boring. Sometimes we do say, oh, the tree of the snake or something, because when something happens. But yeah, normally they're quite boring. But there was this tree which survived a fire in 2015. 2015 was an El Nino year. And when there's an El Nino, the Amazon becomes really, really, really dry. And this one was a massive tree. It was above 30 meters high and it was so large, so large. It was our favorite tree on that plot because we do have something for big trees. You get fascinated by it. You get really humbled by them. But in 2023, another El Nino came, was really dry. And this area, again, it burned. And we went into the forest. So my team, which is made of all this tough men, and me, and we got into the forest and we didn't need to talk. We knew what we were looking for. We knew that we wanted to know if she had survived. In Portuguese, trees are females. So when I'm talking about this one specifically, it always associated with she. So we looked into the forest and you keep looking up because the canopy was so tall that it was easy to see if she was there. But you couldn't see it, but at the same time, you don't accept it, right?
Mm.
So we kept going and we kept going and we kept going, thinking that maybe there's, for some reason, we are not seeing it. Till we got to it and it was lying on the floor. And when it was lying on the floor, it was so tall that it would go up to, my ribs. I had to climb on it to be able to sit on it.
I mean, that's the devastating story of one tree, but this is happening across the Amazon. What does that mean for the Amazon? If it's drying out, it's burning more, it's releasing more carbon, possibly even more. We might be starting to see possibly even more than it's absorbing in the first place. What's going to happen? What does this all mean for the Amazon?
I think this is a crucial question because, of course, this anecdote of one tree is representative of many, many areas that both in 2015 and 2023 burned in a region that didn't originally burn, like we discussed before. In a study that we did based on the 2015 fires, we saw that just this area that I work, which is about 1 million hectares, and emissions were of 450 teragrams of CO2. So that means that in 2015, that region alone would be the 13th most polluting country in the world, if it was a country, being ahead of countries like the UK. So in terms of CO2 emissions, the impact is really, really big and globally relevant because of the magnitude of the CO2 being emitted by these fires. In terms of the future, it's really hard because it's a new problem, as we just discussed, something that historically didn't happen to the Amazon. And it's not only has environmental effects, but also has social and economic. For example, in years that which forest fires are very predominant, like 2015, 2023, you have airports shutting down. They cannot even work on how do you say, equipment landing.
So the planes can't land because the smoke is
Because of
so
the smoke.
thick.
Because
And
the
then you
smoke's
can
so
only
thick.
imagine what that's like for people breathing in and the health consequences, right?
I had pneumonia.
You had pneumonia
I had pneumonia.
from the smoke.
Yes.
Gosh.
There is an increase in years of severe forest fires, then increase in 200% of hospital admissions of children under 5 due to respiratory issues. And of course, that has economic impacts because children under 5 don't go to the hospital alone. So you're removing parents from the workforce, and many of those parents are day laborers. So they are losing income. And one case that happened to me in 2023, there was this driver and he was going from A to B to get more brigades to come to fight the fires. Because of the smoke on the road, on the highway, he didn't see a truck, he fell on a ditch and he died instantly. So we have an increase as well on accidents on motorways because of the smoke. So it has environmental, social, economic impacts. The increase in forest fires.
Will there become a point when the Amazon stops absorbing carbon and becomes an emitter of carbon overall when we look at all those processes?
You're asking about the tipping point. We just released a paper about 2 months ago reviewing the whole literature on the tipping point.
Just explain what the tipping point is for anyone who hasn't heard it.
The tipping point is when the Amazon it's not able to generate enough rainfall to keep itself as a rainforest, and therefore it becomes a novel ecosystem. How this ecosystem is going to look like, there's debate. What most of the scientific community believes that it's going to become a drier forest. It's still a forest, but much, much different than the forest we have now. But what research shows is that parts of the Amazon may be reaching that tipping point. Remember, that is an area that is 7 million square kilometers. It's almost the size of Europe. So it's not homogeneous how any process are going to happen. In the south of the Amazon...
it's happening differently in different areas?
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's happening at different rates at different parts of the Amazon, and some parts don't have any sign of it happening at all. So when we look specifically at the south of the basin, which is the first place that I went to work that you asked me about, deforestation levels are very, very high. That's what we call the arc of deforestation. And that's where we see the largest change in average temperature. And over there, the forest could be emitting more than is absorbing, but that's due to mortality of the trees. We don't know if the tipping point will happen or when it will happen, but I personally don't think that's very important, because if we think there's a cliff in front of you and you are driving a Ferrari in the dark without headlights, it doesn't matter if it's 5 miles away or 10. What it matters is that it's ahead of you, and you have to stop the car in order not to fall off the cliff. And that should be the same for the Amazon.
What might save the Amazon rainforest?
First and foremost is to reduce emissions globally. Without reducing emissions, temperatures are going to continue to rise, the forest is going to continually to get drier, and fires are going to become more and more prevalent in the region. Even if we reduce deforestation, fires are going to be able to continue propagating because it's drier. So that's the first and most important thing that anyone, anywhere, regardless of where they are, can do to help preserve the largest rainforest in the world, is to reduce emissions.
Erica, thank you so much for coming in and telling us all about the Amazon today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, my pleasure.
That takes us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the BBC World Service YouTube channel so you don't miss out. And if you have a climate question of your own, then write it in the comments below and we'll answer it in a future show. I'm Greer Jackson, he's Jordan Dunbar. We'll see you next time.